Okay, let's dive into a really fascinating and kind of revolutionary new theory about the fall of the Roman Empire. It's an idea that challenges pretty much everything we thought we knew, and it suggests that Rome's greatest success was the very thing that doomed it.
You know, we've all heard the classic story. Barbarian invasions, corruption, an empire that just got too big for its britches. But what if that's not really the whole picture? What if those are just the symptoms? Well, some modern research offers this really counterintuitive idea that puts a wild twist on how the ancient world ended.
So, to really get our heads around this new theory, we first have to appreciate the central problem it's trying to solve. And it's a big one, maybe the most epic and enduring question in all of history. Why did Rome actually fall?
Now look, all these usual suspects, they were absolutely real. I mean, they definitely happened. But a new model, one that's actually based on game theory, suggests they weren't the root causes at all. Instead, they were the inevitable fallout from a fundamental structural imbalance that was baked right into the empire itself.
This imbalance is built on a fascinating concept known as the paradox of power. And trust me, this is where the story gets really interesting.
So this concept, which was first cooked up by an economist named Jack Hirschhofer, is completely backwards from how you'd think things work. It basically argues that in some fights, having more to lose can actually make you weaker, not stronger. And it all boils down to what you're giving up by choosing to fight in the first place.
And why is that? Well, for the less developed group, deciding to fight means sacrificing a little bit of wealth from, say, subsistence farming. But for a super developed group, fighting means pulling huge resources away from a vibrant, productive economy. The sacrifice, the opportunity cost, is just so much greater.
So think about it this way. For wealthy, central Rome, peace was incredibly profitable. War was a massive, expensive diversion. But for its poorer neighbors, raiding could actually be way more profitable than farming. And that right there, that creates a really dangerous imbalance of incentives.
All right, so that's the core idea. Now let's see what happens when you take this paradox and apply it across the entire map of a vast empire.
You know, the empire's incredible success actually led to a fatal kind of specialization. The core, especially Italy, got really good at producing wealth. Meanwhile, the periphery, both inside and outside the borders, specialized in military power. Why? Because that was the most effective way for them to get a piece of the core's wealth.
This process actually has a name, barbariogenesis. It's the idea that Rome's immense wealth didn't just sit there. It was an active force. It literally created its own military threat. The richer Rome got, the more it incentivized its neighbors to become powerful, organized military forces that were capable of taking that wealth.
And this graph visualizes that mismatch just perfectly. The blue line shows production, the actual creation of wealth, and it's highest at the core, like you'd expect. But then look at the orange line. That's actual income, and you can see it becomes higher on the periphery. The folks at the center were making all the stuff, but they were keeping less of it because the people on the edge were taking more and more through conflict.
So this whole system of raiding and tribute and extortion, what economists call rent-seeking, it was super unstable. And eventually it had this devastating unintended consequence that just tipped the entire system in the total collapse.
For a while, all the fighting just sort of transferred wealth from the core out to the edges. But over time, the conflict stopped just moving wealth around, and it started to actively destroy it. We're not just talking about stealing grain anymore. We're talking about burning the fields, wrecking the infrastructure, and shattering the complex social systems that made the empire so rich in the first place.
And here you can see the final act. This 3D model plots the empire's resources over the centuries. You see that high, stable plateau at the beginning? That's a prosperous, stable Rome. But then it just plummets. It falls off a cliff, starting near the wealthy core and then spreading outwards. This is that long, slow collapse predicted by the model, a direct result of all that wealth-destroying conflict.
And what's really remarkable is just how well this theoretical model lines up with actual history. The model's high point, that's the prosperity of the early empire. The beginning of its decline, that maps right onto the crisis of the 3rd century. The really steep collapse mirrors the period of major invasions, and its lowest point lines up with the final fall of the West. The accuracy is, well, it's kind of uncanny.
And this wasn't just some external process. The historical record shows this very same wealth-power mismatch happening inside the empire, and it ended up turning its own army against itself.
As the wealthy Italian core demilitarized, because, hey, the opportunity cost of being a soldier was just too high for its citizens,
The periphery became the empire's military specialist. First, they recruited from the provinces, and then from peoples from beyond the frontiers. By the very end, the most powerful figures in the Western Roman army, they weren't Roman at all.
So in the end, it's this incredible irony. Rome's greatest achievement, its amazing wealth and stability, is the very thing that created the dynamic that tore it apart. Its own success bred an unsolvable paradox that incentivized conflict and ultimately led straight to its own ruin.
This whole model gives us a powerful new lens to not only view history but to question the hidden cost of success today. It forces us to ask, could our most successful systems be creating unintended, dangerous incentives on their own peripheries? That's a fascinating and maybe a little unsettling thought to leave you with.